Hey, with your evening story channel, I post new interesting stories every day. Subscribe and click the bell to not miss it. Stephen looked around for the umpteenth time and promised himself that he would clean up. But those thoughts came only in the morning, when he was going to work, and in the evening, he would come home with a bottle of vodka, drink it quickly, and go to sleep. He'd been living at that pace for a year, maybe a little more, ever since Camille had left him for a better life in the city. Stephen had met her in the neighboring village at a disco. He'd never seen her before. The girls didn't give him a pass because he was a good-looking guy. Besides, he worked on a farm, as it was now fashionable to call former collective farms, which suddenly became private estates. Stephen made very good money, and all because he was considered to be almost the best tractor driver and harvester. There was no machinery in the farm on which he would not work well. Men sighed with envy and said that Stephen listened to any metal. Stephen lived alone. The grandmother who raised him died just after he turned 18. It was like she was waiting for him. No one thought that the guy would return to the village after graduation, but he did. Built a big house. He worked hard. He didn't look at girls. He was determined to get on his feet first, so that he wouldn't be ashamed to bring his wife home. Even from childhood, he understood what it was like not to eat enough, not to sleep enough because his grandmother was saving firewood, and the house was very cold. And when I saw Camille, I almost went crazy. The wedding was quick. Camille liked the guy very much, and even more liked that you can finally leave a large family where she was the oldest, and therefore had to help all the time. He spoiled her a lot. He bought outfits that the village had never seen, and she quickly got used to good things. She didn't do farming because of the skin on her hands, because it was hard and many other reasons. And Stephen did everything himself. As long as Camille was happy, they lived like that for 3 years. And one day his wife says, "Stephen, how long are we going to stay here? All the people are developing in the city, moving to the city, and we're all rotting away in the village." Stephen didn't even know what she was talking about. "I never said I wanted to go to the city." "You didn't either. Why are you talking like that all of a sudden?" "Well, I certainly don't want to spend the rest of my life in the country. I hope you're not going to make me do that." Stephen raised his eyebrows. "I don't understand. You're from the village yourself. You've lived here all your life. Where are you going all of a sudden? You need to live a good life nowadays. Wait till I get water in the house. It'll be like a city apartment." Camille got up. She walked nervously around the room. "God, how impenetrable are you? What's water got to do with it?" Theaters, cafes, culture, after all. That day they had a fight. I couldn't help it. First, Stephen called his wife a country princess on a P and left. Then, of course, they made up. They never spoke again. And 3 weeks later, he didn't see Camille when he came home from work. There was only a note on the table saying that she had met a man who understood her, with whom she would live in the city. Camille also wrote that she had taken the money Stephen had been saving in a box. She wrote that it was to compensate her for spending her best years on him. Stephen changed his lifestyle from that day forward. First, he sold off the whole farm. Then he ran the house. No one had any idea until now. What's going on with him? Then the rumors started. He went to work, but he'd already gotten a couple of reprimands because of his breath. I didn't answer. Just that day, when his boss was talking to him, he took a liter instead of half a liter. Stephen sighed and looked around once more. Oh, how he wanted to close his eyes to all of this. He'd even started to tiddy up a couple times, but the first time he'd come across Camille's hairpin. The second was their wedding album. So he gave it up. He went outside. I shivered. It was so cold it stung my nose. I'll have to work hard again to start my tractor. I've had so many arguments with the boss about the watchman not heating the garage. "Excuse me," he shuddered. It was still dark outside, and there was no way he expected to hear an unfamiliar voice at this time. Not even in his own backyard. He turned sharply. In front of him stood a woman or a girl, and behind her a child huddled together. "My God, what are you doing here?" This early and this cold, and with a child. The female figure shrugged uncertainly. That's just the way it is. Can you tell me if there's any place I can find shelter for a while? John is very tired. Only we don't have any money. Stephen tried to look into her face, haggard, thin, and seemingly quite young. Though he might be wrong, knowing his villagers, he could guess that they would rather call it Belize than some vagrant. They'd let him stay for nothing. Stephen glanced at the child who was huddled against the woman. The boy was no more than 5. Then he looked at his watch. No, he couldn't help it. If Stephen was late, everyone would think it was because he was drunk. He put his hand in his pocket and took out his house keys. Here you are, go to my house. I'll be back after 6. It's warm at home. And if you get cold, you can eat the stove. There must be food too. Well, there must be. God knows where it is, but I'm in a mess. I don't have time. Don't go out much. You're going to get a lot of questions. All right, I'm off. I don't have time for this. He gave the dazed stranger the keys, then rushed down the path toward the garages. For some reason, there was no thought that the people were strangers, that they might steal from him. The day passed quickly. The anxiety appeared in the evening, when he turned to the store as usual, but did not stop. He took the invariable half a liter. True, added candy was not sure if his guests were still waiting for him. Maybe they had warmed up. Let's go on. The lights were on in the house. It was so unusual that Stephen felt a tightness in his chest. He cautiously approached the window and peered into the house. Stephen's face stretched. He saw only a part of the room. It was enough to realize that it was in perfect order. Everything was so evenly clean. A young woman and a boy were sitting on the couch under a plaid blanket. They were looking at a book. Stephen took a closer look. He sighed sadly. At one time, when there was still hope that Camille would give birth to him, he had bought up all the children's books, but now there were stacks of dust on the floor by the sofa when his wife left. He wanted to throw them away, but he couldn't. And there was such a forgotten smell of food coming from the house that Stephen involuntarily swallowed. He looked at the bottle in his hands and quickly shoved it into the snow. The young woman jumped up when he entered, blushing. Hello. Pardon me. John and I have been doing a bit of housekeeping. I made dinner, and he was confused. He had no idea that the tramp he had pitied since morning could turn out to be a very pretty young woman. I wouldn't say no to dinner. I'm hungry as hell. She rushed to set the table, and Stephen stripped, undressed, and walked toward the boy. Stephen held out his hand. The boy smiled and gently held out his hand. John, dear John. The little ones love sweets. The boy looked questioningly at the woman. The woman nodded her head. Only then did the child take the treat. Stephen sat down at the table, inhaled the aroma of hot borscht, and even squeezed his eyes shut with pleasure. Only after the plate was empty, he looked at the guest, who was waiting for his words. It was unrealistically delicious. She smiled. Thank you. Is that the least we could do for you? A shadow came over her face. Perhaps we should move on. We've already overstayed our welcome. Stephen raised his eyebrows in surprise, and you're in a hurry to get somewhere. No, there's no rush. Emily was the young woman's name. She came out of the room where she was tucking John in. An hour later, she sat down at the table. Stephen got up and poured tea for her and himself. She thanked him and looked at him with huge blue eyes. Don't think we're not homeless. It's just that it all turned out wrong. I went to school and made the mistake of trusting a guy. No, I don't regret anything because I have John. But I had to go back to the village to my mom, who at that time had married a young man. Mom was not happy about my return, as I later realized, worried about her young husband. John was born. Everything seemed to be more or less normalized. But I couldn't get a job because my mother hung the whole household on me. It's not very pleasant to live without your own money. During the war, my so-called stepfather bought everything, and I didn't need anything. And then my stepfather decided my mom was too old for him. I was much better suited. I told her to get lost. I'm sorry, but somehow my mom found out. She thought it was all my fault. You see, I seduced him. And my own mother and my stepfather decided that my John was not enough for a full family and I should be kicked out. My mother said she'd take away my parental rights for once or twice. I haven't had a job. I'm on their backs. I could make up the rest. So I ran away with John. Only I'm sure they'll be looking for us. My mom's not just gonna let it go. Stephen twirled his spoon thoughtfully. Tell you what, Emily, you saved me for now. We'll figure something out. I'm hardly ever home, so you don't have to be shy with me, and I'll find out what's going on. In a week, Stephen had forgotten he ever had a drink at night. Now he was making things with John, and they were reading with him. The house was clean and warm, and we spoiled him with delicious dinners. It was the kind of life Stephen had always dreamed of. Too bad it wasn't all his. Once he was in a hurry from work, and he was called by a neighbor that Stephen congratulated you. He was even frightened. On what? So Camille's back. It's been 2 hours. Stephen's pale. There's Emily with John, and he ran home. Camille was sitting on the sofa in a beautiful pose, looking at him resentfully. Neither Emily nor John was there. Where are they? Camille pressed her lips together resentfully. I don't get it. Where's the joy of our meeting? She was confident in herself and her charms. Stephen in 2 steps covered the distance to the sofa and with a jerk lifted her up. I asked where they were. She cried out fearfully. How should I know? They went somewhere I don't know. Home, I guess. Stephen let her go and rushed to the door at the door. Stop so that when I come back your spirit won't be here. Camille looked at him in surprise and realized he wasn't joking. But how could he be? She was sure Stephen would cry with joy. Stephen realized it had been an hour, maybe more. They couldn't have gone far. It was already dark outside. Where could they be? God, what kind of punishment did he have? He ran through the village towards the garages. Almost prayed the boss was there. He'd take the equipment anyway and let him go to jail. The boss was there, listened to Stephen's confused story, and nodded at his Jeep. Here you go, it's got better cross-country ability than your tractor. And speed, of course. Thanks, I'll be right back. Drive fast, whistle if you need help. Yes, I'll do anything to bring back the man that brought you back to life. Stephen saw them under a tree 5 kilometers from the village. He pulled up, rushed over to them. Emily, what are you doing? Don't you think about yourself? Oh, I've thought about John. Emily was sobbing on his shoulder. You see, she said she was your wife, that you loved her. And she said that people like us had no right to live at all. Emily said a lot of other things. And Stephen held John and her to him. And all he could think was that he was happy nothing had happened to them. When the flow of tears had subsided a little, Stephen said decisively, We'll apply tomorrow. I'll keep an eye on you so we don't do anything else. Emily didn't object. She just clung to him tighter. John smiled and asked if he would be my daddy. I guess so. John looked at him for a minute, then put his arms around both him and his mom. And the day they signed the papers, Emily's mother and her husband came to visit. Well, hello there. John, get ready quickly. We've got to get home, and I hope they take this tramp to the right place. Emily had gone pale. John clung to her. Stephen stood up. Who would even come into my house without knocking? The woman glared at him. We're the parents of this one. You probably don't care about anything. Don't believe it. Drunkard. One more word against my wife. And I don't care if you're a woman, she hiccuped to. My wife. And this is my son. The adoption is almost finalized. It was quiet for a minute, then the door slammed. The mother's young husband came out. She rushed after him.